Year 1966, year in which Batman hit the big screen. Christopher Lee returned as the Prince of Darkness. And François Truffaut adapted one of the great novels like Fahrenheit 451. But it would also be the year of one of the best films in the history of cinema, the resurgence of a genre that was considered outdated, and the rise of a star. Directed by an Italian, filmed in Spain, and starring an American, this is the story of the good, the bad, and the ugly. Il Buono, Il Bruto, Il Cattivo corresponds to a series of films called the Dollar Trilogy, directed by the Italian director Sergio Leone and starring a young Clint Eastwood. These correspond to the spaghetti western subgenre, or better called Euro-Western, a cinematographic trend that dates back to the end of the 19th century, but which had its greatest impact after the Second World War. After the end of the conflict, the United States implemented the Marshall Plan, an aid package to allied countries that included loans, business establishment, and also films, in a strategy of selling the North American lifestyle and supplying the European production companies that were unable to do so. One case is the Cinecittà Studio, whose sets were used to house people who had lost everything. In this context, the public became more familiar with the productions of Walt Disney and the star system of stars such as Humphrey Bogart, Rita Hayworth, Henry Fonda, among others. But the most popular genre was the Western, John Ford's films with John Wayne, Howard Hawks, and Anthony Mann. A new generation of European filmmakers was educated with classic Hollywood cinema. By the late 50s and early 60s, in the United States, the genre would begin to hang its hat. Films like Shane by George Stevens and The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance by John Ford depicted Twilight protagonists on their last adventure. Furthermore, science fiction was beginning to supplant the Western in popularity. But in Europe, the reality was different. The Western was still on the rise, and this allowed several Hollywood studios to make co-productions with European studios to expand their presence internationally. In addition, filming in countries like Spain, Germany, and Italy beyond finding an exterior similar to the North American West was much more profitable on an economic level. In several cases, European production companies made the film and the United States distributed it, and in others, it also participated as an investor. The most important studio being United Artists. Some notable filmmakers are Sergio Corbucci, Antonio Margheriti, the Spanish Alfonso Balcazar, the Argentine Leon Kilmovsky, as well as Lucio Fulci and Mario Bava prior to their approach to terror. Sergio Leone had barely made his first film, The Colossus of Rhodas, learning the trade as an assistant in the Cinecittà studio of none other than the maestro Vittorio De Sica. Curiously, his call to the West would not come from the United States, but from the other part of the world, Japan. Yojimbo by Akira Kurosawa is a 1961 film whose story stars a samurai played by Toshiro Mifune, a ronin who arrives in a town suffering from a dispute between two sides. Both will try to gain the services of the warrior. After its premiere in Italy, Corbucci told Leone that the story could be adapted into a Western, starting a co-production between the Unidis Studios from Italy, Constantine from West Germany, and Isero Films from Spain, the country where filming was carried out in Almeria. One aspect of the Euro-Western was to have an American actor as its protagonist, several of them with a budding career or who were no longer taken into account in the industry. This can be seen in Quentin Tarantino's film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where Rick Dalton tries his luck in Italy. Returning to Leone, he thought of two iconic actors like Henry Fonda and Charles Bronson to play the man with no name, but they were not interested. Curiously, years later they starred in Once Upon a Time in the West. Other names were Henry Silva, James Coburn, and Richard Harrison, who also rejected the role. But Harrison suggested a young man who acted in a Western series, Clinton Eastwood Jr. He had gotten his start in films like Tarantula and Revenge of the Creature, and years later he had become a familiar face in series like Maverick and Rawhide, which he was working on. Unlike the other actors, Eastwood had seen Yojimbo in a Los Angeles theater, and after reading the script and noticing the similarities, he immediately accepted, feeling attracted to playing an anti-hero. In addition to having an interesting contract of $15,000 for 11 weeks of filming and a Mercedes-Benz at the end of it, Eastwood achieved the renowned aesthetics of his character through various means. He bought a black jean at a sports store, the hat at a store in Santa Monica, his Cobra-handled Colt revolver was a rawhide prop, and his iconic poncho was contributed by costume artist Carlos Simi. And if you ever wondered where that registered expression of the actor comes from, it actually comes from the bad taste of cigarettes. Since he was not a smoker, he disliked the bad taste that remained in his mouth. Finally, in 1964, Italian cinemas released A Fistful of Dollars, marking a before and after in the genre.
This man with no name is played by Clint Eastwood. He's going to trigger a whole new style in adventure. A Fistful of Dollars.
Leone was inspired by the landscaping of John Ford, as well as various techniques of Akira Kurosawa. In addition to having his great friend Ennio Morricone as a composer, who gave the Euro-Western his own sound, if classic Hollywood Westerns sounded like this. Now, with Morricone, the sound changed. The Italian was inspired by the desolate atmosphere of the West and the figure of the gunman who travels alone, having a guitar or harmonica as company to liven up the journey. Morricone's contribution would be called horse opera. From a budget of $225,000, A Fistful of Dollars generated a box office of $20 million. But the success also brought controversy since the film reached Japan, where the Toho studio and Kurosawa would sue the production for plagiarism. The court ruled in favor of the producers of Yojimbo, who kept a percentage of the box office. Kurosawa would joke that he won more on the case than on his own film. After the good reception, Leone and producer Alberto Grimaldi began production on a second film with Clint Eastwood, a production that now had the partnership of United Artists. The movie was for a few dollars more. Two bounty hunters team up to capture a leader and his group of bandits. One will enter as a member to obtain information from the inside, while the other waits for the right moment to act. It is here that Lee Van Cleef made his debut in the Euro-Western, the actor and one of the most iconic faces of the genre. He came from an extensive career in Western films and series, from a supporting actor in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance and appearances in Bonanza. He was not Leone's first choice. Once again sought out Charles Bronson, and he again declined the proposal, being the gateway for Cleef to play bounty hunter Douglas Mortimer. The film improved the box office of its predecessor, $25 million compared to $600,000 cost, confirming the Leone-Eastwood duo, adding Lee Van Cleef. For his part, Morricone composed another of his most iconic soundtracks, being one of the protagonists when it came to transmitting the tone in each scene. He composes diegetically by using elements that are part of the narrative, such as the melody of a clock. A Fistful of Dollars and A Few Dollars More were released in 1964 and 1965 in Italy. But in the United States, both films were released in the last year, surprising the American public to see how Eastwood, from being a rancher in Rawhide, became a cold-blooded gunfighter. By 1966, the United Artists Company with Leone and Grimaldi were pre-producing a third, more ambitious installment of The Man with No Name. production that began to take shape after Luciano Vincenzoni, screenwriter of For a Few Dollars More, suggested a story about three fortune hunters who go after a buried treasure. Adventure in the context of the American Civil War. United Artists contributed $500,000 plus international distribution, while the European production companies contributed the remaining cost to $200,000, a high budget for this type of productions. The first script was titled The Man with No Name, where Vincenzoni, together with other screenwriters, the Scarpelli brothers, known for their satirical comedies, wrote a script in a comic tone. The director disagreed with this new approach and ended up assuming the role of screenwriter. Vincenzoni abandoned the project, but not before defining the title The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Leone was pressed for time since he was weeks away from starting filming. But the Italian used one of his passions outside of cinema, such as history, one of his hobbies being the American Civil War. He dedicates most of the time to defining the personalities of the protagonists. As he commented in several interviews, the three are a reflection of himself. Angel Eyes is an observer, detail-oriented and professional.
But you know the pity is when I'm paid. I always follow my job through. You know that. No! Angel Eyes!
Blondie is methodical and at the same time careful.
No! I'll kill you! Such ingratitude after all the times I've saved your life.
While Tuco, his most beloved character, stated that he is warm and kind when he wants to be, but that he can also be a real son of a bitch.
You pay for this! I hope you end up in a graveyard with the cholera and the rabies and the plague! Cut me loose! Cut me loose, you filthy bastard!
Filming began in May 1966 at the Cinecittà Studios, filming the scene where Blondie captures Tuco, while Cleef was in Spain, in the Almeria area with a second filming crew, performing the scenes where he participates without the other two protagonists. 90% of the production was carried out in the Iberian country, with the Spanish army itself as collaborators, participating as extras in the Civil War combat scene, in the construction of the cities, the Sad Hill Cemetery, and above all, the bridge that is dynamited in the film. Leone was inspired by Buster Keaton's The General for this scene, with the curiosity that the bridge had to be built twice, since the first explosion would destroy several cameras and did not finish capturing the explosion. Care and prevention would not be a virtue in filming the good, the bad, and the ugly. Eastwood remembers that the set was a Tower of Babel where Spanish, Italian, and French were spoken, and only the protagonists spoke English. On 2 occasions, Eli Wallach was in danger of getting hurt, even seriously. The first, when he is saved, and the horse runs away with the actor's hands and feet tied. No one on the team was aware of stopping the animal from passing, having to go look for it, with the danger of Wallach falling off his saddle. The second was in the scene where Tuco cuts the chains on the train tracks, being a few centimeters away from practically losing his head. Eastwood was also saved by a matter of centimeters in the aforementioned bridge scene, where we can see how a piece of rubble passes very close to the actor. Leone and team may not have been very attentive to the care, but the attention and detail was reflected in the visual aspect of the film, a mark of the director in his filmography when using anamorphic lenses, ideal for general shots, but which he also uses in close-ups and even very close-ups. The film was shot in 235-1 format using an Arriflex 35 camera, really new camera for that time, mostly used by Stanley Kubrick. Once again, Ennio Morricone participated in the film, providing one of the most iconic soundtracks and surely the characteristic theme of the Western. Not only transmitting the action, and just by listening we feel like we are riding towards the horizon, but also an enormous sensitivity in several passages of the film in themes such as A Soldier's Story. Other of the most remembered would be Ecstasy of Gold, where Leone suggested the musician add a choir, since the scene takes place in the cemetery, so that this could be the cry of the dead. Morricone was assisted by one of his disciples and future great Italian composers such as Bruno Nicolai, known for his Euro-westerns and giallo. Filming lasted 2 months, finishing at the end of July and making the grand premiere in December. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly shared billboards with other works such as the Batman movie, Michelangelo Antonioni's Blow Up, and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf by Mike Nichols. From $1.2 million, the film ended up grossing $39 million worldwide. Being praised by the public and critics, signifying a fresh air in the genre and the rise of Clint Eastwood as a figure where the press would position him as a worthy successor to John Wayne. As time went by, the film transcended the genre, becoming a pop icon. One of the biggest admirers of the film and of Leone's work in general is Quentin Tarantino, who takes advantage of each interview to demonstrate his fascination.
My favorite movie of all time is The Good and the Bad and the Ugly.
If you were going to be in a movie by another director, who would it be?
Ooh la la.
Ooh la la.
Question.
Really?
Yeah, very good question.
One.
John Stewart, one. Let me see. Who would it be? Actually, of living directors right now.
Yeah. Or dead. Okay.
Well, dead directors, I'd be digging on being in a Sergio Leone movie.
Sergio Leone.
That would be cool.
You know, at the end of the day, I think the one artist that I think is the most influential to me as in my work has got to be Sergio Leone.
Outside of the cinema, bands like the Ramones and Metallica used part of the soundtrack to open their shows. And what happened to the lives of its protagonists after the film? Director Sergio Leone continued to be linked to the genre with Once Upon a Time in the West in 1968, in co-production with Paramount. The Italian wanted to do a 4th installment with Clint Eastwood, but the actor rejected since he was looking to continue growing in Hollywood. Leone was left without his star, but this opened the opportunity for him to have 2 of his dreams, like Henry Fonda and Charles Bronson, in the film. Eastwood established himself in the industry and would be a strong candidate as James Bond, succeeding none other than Sean Connery. But as we know, the story was different, and Clint put on the inspector suit as Harry Callahan, starting another great series of movies like Dirty Harry. Eli Wallach continued his career between the United States and Italy, and later participated in films such as The Godfather Part 3 and The Holiday. Lee Van Cleef also continued with the Western genre, taking advantage of his already characteristic bearing, with the curiosity that in these films, Cleef is the protagonist and consequently the good guy of the film. Years later, he played Houck in the memorable Escape from New York, directed by John Carpenter. Another interesting story would be the Sad Hill Cemetery. After filming finished, the crew left the place as it was, spending decades until nature returned it to its original landscape. But it is here where a group of Spanish fans of the film carried out archaeological and restoration work on the location, forming a peregrine for every lover of the genre. If you are interested in knowing its history in depth, there is the documentary Sad Hill Unhartingle on Netflix, one of the most representative films in the history of cinema, the mega production of a genre that was believed to be outdated, but that always proves to have one more bullet. 5 decades later, the impact of the film is undeniable, as is Leone's work. A Western filmed in Spain, directed by an Italian and whose story goes through the mythology of the North American Western. This has been the story of the good, the bad, and the ugly.